I'm about to say something that I have never said before, ever. I read 13 books this month. I know it sounds like I read a book every other day. That's not what I did quite. In normal life, I'm lucky if I can read like 3 a month. Like, no joke. But I have found such a nice routine that July has just been like peak reading for me, and I'm having the best time. I feel like I'm taking my time with all of these books. I've enjoyed these books so much, and I can't wait to talk about all of them. There will be time codes below. But I have a really great system. I'm usually reading 3 books at a time, 1 audiobook, 1 novel in hand, and then like 1 nonfiction book that I come back to, which will make sense as I go through the books. And then I would often like finish all 3 of those at the end of a week. I don't know how this happened. I'm so proud. I've set a Goodreads challenge for myself for the first time since like 2013 maybe? I'm trying to be really careful with myself because once I start making it a competition, even with myself, like I will burn out immediately. I'm just like letting it happen. Excited to talk about these books. I'm gonna go slightly out of order because some people just want to watch the world burn. If you're new here, I'm about to talk about so many books. But hello, my name is Tiernan. I talk about queer books quite a bit. Links to everything are below, and let's jump in. Like I said, time codes below. A lot to discuss in this video. I have to talk about this book first because it shook my entire world. It is A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor by Hank Green. This is the sequel to An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, which I read right when it came out in 2018, but it was during like a total YouTube drought. It was the climax of college for me, so I was not really focusing on keeping y'all updated with what I was reading. Like, I was barely reading, but I really liked that book when it came out. But this one, it's like one of the best sequels I've ever read. The characters in this duology are so lovable, and it's hard to believe with the themes of this book that it was not written during this time. I mean, there's even references to like pandemic, quarantine, like those words are in this book for unrelated reasons. This sequel really takes it into overdrive, multiple perspectives as opposed to the first one, which is just told from April's perspective. I can't say enough about this series. If you have not read An Absolutely Remarkable Thing yet, I highly recommend that you do that. And if you have and you haven't picked up the sequel yet, you're gonna want to get on it. It's just like fascinating, unique. It's unlike anything I've ever read, and it really sets up Hank Green for me as like an author who I will read whatever he writes now. Before, I enjoyed his book and I really loved him and everything he does. This takes him to a whole other level for me. I don't usually give like star ratings or numbers in my videos, but I'm gonna try. I'm gonna go out of 10, and I'm gonna give A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor a solid 9. I just can't say enough about it. The next book I read this month is Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. This book has always been on my radar, but I decided to pick up the audiobook. I've been going on some long walks lately, so lots of audiobooks in my life. This is a book I will be recommending forever. It's probably the best memoir I've ever read. If you pick it up expecting like the story of how Trevor Noah became a comedian and how he rose to fame, that's not what this is at all, but it is entertaining in his Trevor Noah way. It's also just very educational. I didn't know too much about apartheid and South Africa, so it really dives into that. I mean, the title, Born a Crime, he was literally born in apartheid as a mixed race child. The stories of his childhood are so fascinating, so heartfelt, and listening to him do the audiobook, it also adds a level of humor because he does these voices for like his mom. I couldn't ask for a more heartwarming, fun, but also super educational, important, touching book that is really nicely structured. Also would be enjoyable even if we didn't know who Trevor Noah was. Definitely would give Born a Crime by Trevor Noah a 9.5. Next up, I read The Guest List by Lucy Foley. This was a Reese's Book Club pick, as you can tell by this irremovable sticker. So this is sort of like a thriller, mystery, very high-end wedding taking place on this island off the coast of Ireland. Two very successful, famous people, told from multiple perspectives: the bride, the plus one, the best man, the wedding planner, and the bridesmaid. I read the first 50 pages in book form, and there's something about the sentences that I just couldn't stand. They're so short. It was way too pithy. I couldn't stand the writing style, but there was something telling me that I should power through the story. And so I switched to the audiobook, and it really just turned into a whole other experience. I could like feel myself relaxing into the story. Hearing the different perspectives, like the different actors with their different accents, was very fun. It's entertaining for sure. I wanted to know what was going to happen. I wanted to know what they were hanging over us, what the twist was going to be. And if you're a fan of thrillers, I think this is so worth your time, but it definitely wasn't my cup of tea. I thought it could have been way higher stakes. I thought it honestly could have been like 100 pages longer, more fleshed out, but it feels like a movie that you watch on a rainy day. It feels very adaptable, just not something that I'll like carry with me. So I'd give this like a 7. This next book I read at the end of June, but I'm gonna sneak it in because I haven't talked about it in a video yet. It is Love, Creekwood by Becky Albertalli. This is a novella following the characters of Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda, or Love, Simon. They're in college now, and the story takes place over email. It's about 100 pages. If you guys haven't watched Love, Victor yet, it's so cute. I highly recommend watching it on Hulu. That and Little Fires Everywhere. If you don't have Hulu yet, those should be your reasons for getting it. If you're a fan of Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda, this is so worth your time. It's really cute. Nothing like huge earth-shattering happens, but if you're like me and enjoy revisiting characters, seeing where the author tells you they are years later, it's not even that far later. It's very cute, and Becky Albertalli is donating all of her proceeds of this, including her whole advance, to the Trevor project, which means a lot to me, and so that's why I picked it up. And you could read it in just like one quick go. Like I said, it's just 100 pages of emails between like Simon, Blue, Leah, Abby, and some others. It's so much fun. I would definitely give it a 7.5. This next book I also read at the end of June, but I haven't mentioned it in an update video yet, so this is my last June book, I promise. It is All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. I had mentioned this briefly in another video, but I hadn't finished it yet. Now that I've finished it, I can definitely say this is a powerful memoir manifesto. I've never read a memoir that was so focused on YA. Like, this is marketed as a YA memoir. It's coming of age as a queer black kid. The stories that are told are just so potent and really give you a comprehensive look at George M. Johnson's life and how it relates to the big picture of his future and also society. He makes that tie for you over and over again, which is the weakness of this book. George M. Johnson, I believe, has a journalist background, and I think that really works against him here because he's constantly spelling out how his experience ties into the big societal picture. When you get it in like the first couple paragraphs of the chapter, and then you enjoy the story, but then he spends like 2 or 3 pages diving deep into something that you already realized, and it's almost insulting as a reader. I mean, getting past those deep explanations was frankly annoying, but it's still worth your time to get to those deep, well-written stories that he does have in this book. Very captivating, touches on a lot of different themes, but I had a hard time getting past that for a while. I would give it a 7. Next up, I read The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. This was a National Book Award winner a few years ago, and I finally got my hands on it and read it. It's written in verse. This tells the story of Xiomara. She's in high school, living in New York City, has very strict religious parents, don't allow her to date, don't allow her to explore her artistic side, and so the story is largely about her dating and exploring her artistic side. Her brother's sexuality is also a small aspect of this story. It's gorgeously written. The metaphors, the storytelling, reading a book in verse is so refreshing. I read The Black Flamingo last month and have just wanted to read more and more of that ever since, and so this was that for me. I thought the structure was a little funky. There's this poetry club that is sort of hanging over her head for a little bit too long, I think. It takes a long time to really get there, but the journey of getting there is still really beautiful. In the end, it all makes sense. Every issue I had with the plot is so forgivable because of the unique storytelling, the fact that it's written in verse. Like, I really loved that. The characters were all so strong. You really can't touch this writing. Glad that I read it for sure, and I got a lot out of it. It was definitely an emotional hard hitter. I would give it like a 7.8. The next book I want to talk about is Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. I read 2 Elizabeth Acevedo books this month. This one I listened to. I heard that the audiobook was really beautifully done from 2 different perspectives. I've never listened to a book in verse. Elizabeth Acevedo actually reads the character of Yahaira, and another actress does Camino. This book is so gorgeous. This is just the normal hardcover. It is glossy. It's got this duality of the two worlds. If you don't know what this book is, after 9/11 in 2001, there was another devastating plane crash. No survivors, and this book follows these two sisters who didn't know that the other one existed until their father dies on his way to the Dominican Republic. That is the premise of the book, but sort of like the Poet X, that part doesn't even come in kind of until halfway through. Like, this is really just the journey of grief with these two girls and their inner circles. So it is really like curious to me how the two Elizabeth Acevedo books I read this month had the same like plot weirdness to me, but I didn't mind it either time because the writing is so beautiful. I'm attached to the characters and I could just stay with them for a long time, and then it's like along comes plot. I really enjoyed the exploration of sexuality in this book, or rather how it was kind of not an exploration. Yahaira is already out and proud with her girlfriend, and that was really great to see. It's one of those like, I didn't know this was going to be a queer book when I picked it up, and that's always such a pleasure because I prefer those. This book is gorgeous. I highly recommend picking it up. I love the unexpected education that came with this, you know, learning about this real flight that went down after 9/11 and how it was totally overshadowed, not given a place in history or the media. Who better to tell this story than Elizabeth Acevedo? No one. So I'm gonna give Clap When You Land a 7.9. Next up, I'm so happy to tell you that I read A Star Is Bored by Byron Lane. This book is brand new, just this past week. The story of this book is that this author, Byron Lane, it's his debut novel. He is the former personal assistant to Carrie Fisher. And so the thing happening with this book is it's a tell-a-lot novel of this fictional guy, Charlie, getting a job as a personal assistant to fictional film icon Kathy Cannon, who I kept picturing as Patti LuPone and not Carrie Fisher. Had to course correct so many times, even though, as he disclaims at the beginning, this is not about Carrie Fisher, but it's, you know, inspired by real experience. She has a famous mother who's also a movie star. What you expect from this book is that it's, you know, funny, lots of really juicy moments, insight on like being a Hollywood assistant, and lots of stress and craziness managing someone else's life, and that is all there. But the extra element is the writing. It's so good, and you really care about this character. He's dealing with a lot internally with his family. His mother has passed away. He has all of this childhood trauma at the end of his 20s, which was kind of nice to read about in a weird way. You don't always see people dealing with their childhoods like deep into adulthood in characters, and I think a lot of adults have to do that constantly. This book really keeps it real, and it is so funny. The character of Kathy Cannon, her chemistry with Charlie, who she calls Cockring in this book, so many jokes there. I would recommend this if you're doing some like heavy reading this summer and you need a palate cleanser. I'd recommend this one, and also Beach Read that I am talking about in this video. I think the trickiest part of books is like that 50 to 75% range, and I think there's like probably 30 pages that could have been cut in there. Like there's like one or two many adventures for me, but that is not a deal breaker like at all. This book is actually pretty short and I read it very quickly. There was just one point where I was like, okay, clearly something is looming that we have to get to. Some really gorgeous metaphors in this, some sentences that were just like major highlight moments for me. Like a couple of those sentences that really just make the book. When he's observing Kathy Cannon and how she kind of becomes an actress, you can kind of feel Byron Lane like learning to write a novel as he goes, but he gets it right at pretty much every turn. I'd give A Star Is Bored a 7.9. Next up, I read Dear Martin by Nick Stone. This is a YA novel that deals with police brutality, issues of race in high school. It's also extremely short, but it doesn't feel short. Like, quite a bit happens. It's very intense. This is often seen as a parallel to The Hate You Give, I think, because of the themes and the events, but I really think everyone should read both. The voice of justice was really captivating. There's a few really great classroom scenes where Nick Stone sort of goes into like play structure of lines like this, It's called Dear Martin because he's writing letters to Martin Luther King Jr., which was a really powerful aspect of the story. I thought it was brilliantly told. The sequel, Dear Justice, is coming out in the fall. I just got the ARC, so I will be reading it so soon. Be aware that this book is gut-wrenching, but I was late to reading this, so if you're also late to reading this, I highly recommend it. This flew to the top of my list, and I recommend it does the same for you. I would definitely give this an 8.3. The next book I read was Beach Read by Emily Henry. This was like my summer, just like refreshing, lighthearted rom-com book. Last year it was Red, White, and Royal Blue, and this year I guess it's this. But I hung out with my friend Jenna Claire, and she told me about it and how much she loved it, and then I just immediately bought it and read it because that's what we have time to do now. Hallelujah. This book follows January. She's a best-selling romance novelist, and she's trying to work on her next book at her dad's house in Michigan, which he owned with his secret lover before he died. She finds out her neighbor is her college nemesis, who's also a best-selling writer. So they meet and challenge each other to write each other's genres, so they make a deal, and it's so cute. I just flew through it and ate it up. Like, I've been reading some heavy stuff this month, and this is exactly what I needed to just like lift my spirits for the few days I was reading it. It's called Beach Read, and it is such a beach read. It's a little on the nose. Really well written, fleshed out characters, good diversity in this book, so much cuteness. It's tough to read romance sometimes, especially a straight romance for me. Like, I don't have a lot of patience for that, but this was so good. I give it a strong 7.9. Next up, I read Fun Home by Alison Bechdel. I've seen this musical twice, and I have obsessed over the music for the past 5 years, but I've never actually read the comic book. And I'm so glad I did because it's kind of different. And it was so fun to see like the little moments that were turned into huge earth-shattering songs in the musical. Like, I loved picking up on all of those things. If you don't know, this is a comic book that is also a memoir of Alison Bechdel, and it's reflecting on her father's death. He was gay, she is gay, and the way she connects to him through that. And it was also adapted into an award-winning Broadway musical. But the book, the words, the writing, the comics, so powerful. Literally, it's split into like 7 chapters, and I read chapter 1 one night, not necessarily intending to read the entire book, but I was so hooked because every chapter holds this emotional punch that is just so devastating. At some point in the middle, it felt like some of the chapters were doing the same thing, but it never stopped me from reading. Literally, if you stumble upon a copy of this book and you just read chapter 1, you could do it in like 5 minutes. It will like knock you to the floor. So lyrical and poetic, and also funny, like also a comic book. I would give this a 9. The next book I am surprised to tell you that I read is A Very Punchable Face by Colin Jost. This is his brand new memoir. You know Colin Jost from Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live, and he's also been a writer there for about 15 years. He's engaged to Scarlett Johansson, a personality trait. I started listening to the audiobook one night. I couldn't fall asleep, and I've always really liked him. I've always been annoyingly attracted to him. So I listened to like the first chapter and then just like listened to the whole thing because I suddenly had the audiobook, and it's a quick read. Honestly though, really well written, really fascinating stories about his childhood. Like, usually when you read memoirs like this, those childhood chapters feel really forced and obligatory, and it's like get to the SNL parts. There's some really great SNL parts in this book, but there's also so many good, funny stories about his life and childhood. This is worth the read for sure, and definitely do the audiobook because he narrates it, and that's the only way that you should experience a comedian's memoir, is having them read it to you for like 5 hours. Nothing like crazy is revealed here, and nothing makes me cry, and that's totally okay. It's just fun stories, like fun essays from a really funny, hardworking guy. Fascinating insights about the Harvard Lampoon, about getting hired at SNL at 22 and working there, the Trump episode. So I'd give this a solid 7.7. Next up, I'm excited to talk about Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde. I read this entire collection of essays and speeches this month, and I highlighted throughout the entire book. I felt like I was constantly highlighting. I had read like uses of the erotic and her interview with Adrienne Rich in queer theory classes in college, but never the entire Sister Outsider iconic collection. Reading an essay collection like this feels like a greatest hits album of a cultural icon like Audre Lorde. Like, this deserves to be devoured start to finish in order, and I'm so glad I took my time and did that. I would go and read like one essay or speech a night, highlight it, really take my time with it. Powerful themes on racism, sexism, homophobia, interpersonal relationships. This book feels like church. To think that this was initially published in '84, it reads like as so relevant, which is both powerful and a little sad. Everyone should read this book. At times it is a lot to take in, and that's why I recommend just taking it one essay at a time. It helped me weirdly to think of it as like her album. So many themes are touched on so beautifully here. 9.5, Sister Outsider, Audre Lorde. The next book I read is Stamped by Jason Reynolds and Ibram X. Kendi. This is a non-fiction YA book. It's YA because it is marketed that way, and it's a remix of Ibram X. Kendi's National Book Award winning Stamped from the Beginning, which is a start to present day history of racism. So it's rewritten for a young adult audience in a more digestible, but still very comprehensive, very educational way. I didn't totally know what this book was for a long time, and I'm really glad I did read it. It's something that I do want to revisit because I listened to the audiobook, so I was digesting it as it happened, and I want to go back now that I have the physical copy and highlight names and really do more searching within it. But having gone through it one time, this is something that I think should be like in high school classrooms. This is a #1 New York Times bestseller, so if you are doing any anti-racism reading right now, this is the one where it's like the actual history in a very digestible, well-written way. You know Jason Reynolds as a YA writer, All American Boys. Ibram X. Kendi has that other book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Together, they are a powerful, powerful team. I can't recommend this book enough. If I ever have like a high schooler in my life, like this really should be part of US history curriculum. Next up, I read True Grit by Charles Portis. I listened to the audiobook narrated by Donna Tartt, of all people. She did such a lovely job. You may have seen this as a Coen Brothers movie with young Haley Steinfeld a little while ago, or the John Wayne adaptation from the 60s. This book is from the 60s. I have this job at a social responsibility agency, and we have a book club between 4 of us on staff. My boss actually picked this book out based on Donna Tartt's essay. Otherwise, I probably never would have read it, which is fine, and I'm so glad I did. What a fun, interesting journey told from the perspective of this really young girl, basically going on the journey to avenge her father's death. She's so ambitious. The voice is just perfect. It's like funny, it's action, adventure. If you're looking for like a classic that you can really just devour in a weekend, this is a really good one. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know how your reading month was. What books are you excited to read? I have some exciting plans for August. I'm reading a lot of ARCs right now for the fall new releases. So I just got Jodi Picoult's The Book of Two Ways, Dear Justice, Surrender Your Son. So I'm looking at those in the near future. I'm going to read Trials of Apollo coming up. We shall see. I'll talk to you guys next time. Have a good one.